I mean,
Yeah.
Relatable though.
well, obviously,
No,
listen, I'm not even going to go there. I almost made a great joke and very bad taste.
But this is for Eugene. Eugene, I want to get yours, because me and Eugene have an ongoing, I wouldn't call it a disagreement, but I would say a slight disagreement about the issue of identity politics. I think we mostly agree, but I'm just slightly more against it than Eugene is, for good reason.
I know.
Oh,
But
wow.
I know.
But
I know when I'm getting beat by a cop, I want him to be black.
I mean,
I'm
I think
just
it probably
saying.
doesn't matter that much in the process of being beaten.
But Eugene, did you see the
Sean,
CIA
did you agree
video?
with me,
And
or
I
what?
want to. What was your take, Eugene? Do you want to join the CIA now that you know? I need to know if Eugene wants to join the CIA now that it's such an inclusive
I
environment.
mean, I'll be honest
for
with
people
you.
of color.
I did look up the benefit plan.
He
I
does
think
rock
it
that
was
top
curious.
button. He does rock
But,
that top button.
You know, listen, I don't think they would let me rock the top button. They might think I'm an Iranian agent or something. Yeah.
That's actually true.
Look, the video is obviously ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, you know, there's so many things I could say, Rania. I feel like that was such a loaded question. You know, I mean, like, what is identity politics to a
Tell me
degree?
how you
I mean,
really
you know,
feel.
as I said on the Punch Out this week, the patrons only edition of the Punch Out, I mean, imperialism co-opting thing is as old as time. I mean, Woodrow Wilson tried to co-opt self-determination, but obviously self-determination is good. The government went to great lengths, spent billions of dollars through the agency of the Ford Foundation, among others, to co-opt Black Power. But it doesn't mean that the Black Power movement was bad. Every Black History Month, we have to look at these disgusting displays of like the DOD talking about how Martin Luther King, 2 years ago they actually said this at the DOD Black History, I'm not making this up, that Martin Luther King would have supported the wars that they had today. And I mean, it's all absolutely ridiculous. It's all absolutely disgusting. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, as long as imperialism is not defeated, it will always co-opt that which it views, or attempt to co-opt that which it views as oppositional. So to me, as it would seem like a lot of heat and light over nothing in many ways in the controversy. It's not really a new or a novel phenomenon. I think it's just the natural phenomenon of the terrain of struggle. Like, if you struggle on any important issue, that it has any level of effectiveness in moving broader social consciousness, if there is a ruling class, they're going to try to get in on it. And I think that we have to be very careful of how we evaluate that, because, you know, as much as we want to say, whatever, the CIA thing is dumb, these DOD things are ridiculous, they're all hypocritical, they're this, that, and the third. I mean, the only reason they're happening is because people from these communities are struggling for recognition, struggling for their own humanity, struggling for democracy in the most general sense. I mean, you know, you look at the rhetoric of the civil rights movement, certainly at the time, you know, as they were saying, many of them, SNCC especially, well, the right to vote is not everything. There's the famous quote, what's the right to vote if you can't, what's the right to sit at a lunch counter if you can't afford the hamburger? So obviously there are deep limitations. And in fact, the inclusion of African Americans as a voting population was then taken and now is used and propagandized in a way to say, well, you know, it shows that the system is good and brought Black people in. Obviously, it doesn't show that, but it doesn't mean that they were wrong to fight for voting rights. And so I think that part of the challenge is that there is a identity politics of imperialism that is looking to distort these things, but there's also an identity politics of a resistance to oppression and a struggle for people to be treated equally, a struggle for people to be included, to not have to be humiliated everywhere they go because of who they are. And ultimately, obviously, the system is going to attempt to adopt that. If not, it will become tremendously explosive and something they can't do. So to me, the question that we have to be asked, and this is why I was annoyed with the discourse around this, is not, is this bad? Is it an example of how things are co-opted, whatever, but what does it mean to wage principled struggle against imperialism on important issues like this, knowing that it is possible that they will try to use it with more power and a bigger megaphone and microphone to derail us? And I think that was the question that I feel didn't really get touched on, despite it, to me, the go forward issue being the most important issue, rather than rehashing something that we've seen a million times before and we'll see as we continue to struggle. Until you defeat the enemy, they're going to look for ways to dilute your power.
So I don't think anything you said is wrong. I will add to it, though, that I actually think this was also a CIA, an institution of extreme power, trying to recruit from the millennial generation. And this is the language of millennials, particularly at the kind of places they recruit from. This is the way people at even Ivy League universities talk now. It's like it's a generational language. And the CIA does tend to recruit from higher education kind of places. And this is the language of academia. I mean, anybody who's going to college or has been through college is in their 20s and 30s. This is the language that you've become used to. It's just like culturally, this is how we speak. So I think that's also part of it too, is like trying to recruit in a way that seems attractive to this generation. The thing I think also that I want to point out is I don't know if it's necessarily right to say that imperialism is co-opting identity politics, because identity politics isn't necessarily right-wing or left-wing. It can be both. There's right-wing identity politics. There's also the kind of identity politics that imperialism enforced on places all around the world. I mean, I come from the Middle East. The Middle East was literally cut up into sectarian states by identity, and governments were set up. I mean, as recently as, after we invaded and destroyed the government in Iraq and collapsed the state, what did America replace it with? They replaced it with a sectarian system that literally gives out power by sect, and that caused a civil war. And the same kind of situation in Lebanon with the sort of formula of sectarian identity politics, if you will, structurally, the French set up. So I don't necessarily, maybe it's not new. Maybe it's not new using with like imperialism using identity. And I think it's also, I think it's important to note, like I said, it's not a right or left wing thing. It's how it's used. Like there's white identity politics. What is white supremacy? Right. If not white identity politics? What is the state of Israel? That's identity politics with an army. Like, it is a certain kind of identity based politics. So I don't think it's necessarily right to say they co-opted. And the last thing I'll say about it is, and this is, I think, where you and I maybe have slight disagreement, is I do see the way that identity politics can bury the issue of class. And it's with the kind of liberal way it's used. It's with the sort of liberal obsessive focus on representation and diversity to the exclusion of everything else. And that's where identity politics can be a huge problem, right? Because then everybody, like Jim Clyburn, might tell us, like, it's like, because Obama's president, there's no racism anymore. It's like, well, wait, you're like, that's a very surface level thing. You have to dig deeper. But anyways, I don't know if Sean and Juan want to add anything else on that.
Yeah,
it's been talked about all week.
I'm old enough to remember when racists used to say that there's no more racism because Obama was president. And as it concerns this commercial, I think two things. Number one, honestly, how gross it is to sort of use the image of a Latin woman in this way. She even had the shirt that said "Mija" with the women's liberation fit on it.
They told her, wear your most Latina shirt. It's like, tomorrow we film you, wear your most Latina. Now she probably showed up and it was like picture day, and it didn't have no back. Like it was just they put it around her.
You know what I'm saying?
Sorry,
and I thought about, I'm like, okay, well, what about all the women in like Guatemala, or what I'm saying, or Panama, or Chile, or El Salvador? I mean, the CIA has killed a lot of women in Latin America alone. We're not even talking about like the rest of the earth. So it's odious in the same way that it is to shoehorn in some like white CIA guy in the Black Panther movie. And also, I think Eugene's right. I mean, the reason why we're seeing this in the framing that we're seeing it is the same reason that Derek Chauvin got charged. It's the same reason that Joe Biden put forth this ambitious raft of policies and whatnot and proposals not long ago. It's because there is like a militant movement that's been in the streets. Millions of folks came into the streets over this past summer. Right. And it's clearly reaching the highest levels of the capitalist state. So do we celebrate the fact that we see this in a commercial? No. But what we do is understand that impact that we're having, and then ask ourselves, well, how do we organize at a higher level, strengthen the work that we're doing to elevate the struggle and to actually continue to push for all these things that we're talking about? And if we do that, they could, they could make a movie out of those doggone commercials, Human and CIA, and it won't mean nothing.
Right. I mean, the thing is also, they're having a hard time recruiting people right now. Like I saw an article last year about how like police chiefs were talking about how they were having a hard time getting people to want to be police officers. I mean, with reason, right? Like the reason, like, because there's a major critique on this institution. Even if you like in your heart of heart want to become a police officer, like right now is not the time, right? Because you feel like you might. It's not that you don't think that you don't think that police are racist or that you think that police are bad, but like you don't want to be criticized about it, right? Because that's the power of the movement right now. So this is them grasping for straws. I saw an article last year in the middle of the pandemic. It was like, oh, you think policing is bad? The answer isn't abolishing the police. You should become a police officer and fix the institution from the inside. And that was on the New York Times, right? So and that to me looked like an ad for the NYPD. And the thing is that when we critique the system, and as the system gets critiqued by more and more people, and even folks that don't really have like a political line, these institutions begin to crumble. Right. And that's what we see now with the rise of police brutality, even like in the middle of the uprising, even now, like the way that the police were like reacting to this thing it's a system that is scared of itself falling apart. Right. So they're not going to change for the good. This is what we get. Right. We get is like a woke CIA ad. But at the end of the day, they're going to be more aggressive. They're going to be more militarized. Because that's the way that capitalism reacts to things. And the state is going to react this way. It's going to become more fascistic.
I think that's
and
true.
Juan, what you're describing is the way that the state will contort and twist and turn itself just to continue to justify its existence. Now, it won't change its form and its function.
No.
It'll just change the superficial part, right? And I'm glad you raised that part, because I can't. A couple of years ago, I can't remember what city or town it was, but it was this cat. He was a black police chief, and he was talking to like the Black Lives Matter movement. He was like, "Well, if you got a problem with policing, don't pick up a sign, pick up an application." Right. Like I still remember that. Like this whole idea about like changing it from the inside. And I can't remember the name. And this happened recently. I can't remember the woman's name. This was a black woman who was a cop, and she was fired because she stopped a white cop from putting a chokehold on a black man.
This was a couple years ago. Just now was when when they like dropped the charges on her or something, or they passed a law.
They let her get her pension.
Yeah,
they let her get her pension and stuff. So she's been fighting for. So this was a black person on the inside who was stopping an incident of police abuse and was punished for it for years, right? And to the point we tried to impact the way that she made a living. And so all this stuff about changing it from the inside, there's no changing from the inside of a system that's racist by its very nature. You cannot do it.
I want to just raise this, which speaks very much to this in terms of this. One thing you all may not know about Rania and I, we were both in Baltimore just after the uprising. And some people, especially if you're from the Mid-Atlantic, you may remember, you won't remember his name, a guy named Luke Shelley. But he was this guy, he'd been deployed to Baltimore as a part of the National Guard during the uprising. And he made all this news because he then became a Baltimore cop. And it was all this news about how this is like the right kind of cop. This is the guy we need. He was talking about how he was so inspired about, what he had seen to try to change policing and the interactions he had. Well, anyway, in a report that came out earlier this year about the use of force by police in Baltimore, this guy, Luke Shelley, right kind of cop, the people that they were recruiting allegedly to improve police after the uprising, had 8 complaints and was involved in 67 use of force incidents.
That's the right cop.
I mean, it just gives you a sense of how absurd it is. What's that, Sean?
No, I was saying Juan said, the right kind of cop. I mean, he literally was, just not the way that they were trying to make it seem. And I mean, isn't Baltimore the same city where they had that big scandal with like their gun recovery unit, and one of the officers was getting ready to testify and then like ended up dying on mysterious circumstances?
Gun Trace Task Force. Every single person should go out and get the book, I Got a Monster, which is about the Gun Trace Task Force. Extreme corruption. I mean, they were going all over the city of Baltimore. They were robbing drug dealers, all sorts of people, hundreds of thousands of dollars. They were doing drug deals. They were planting drugs. They were falsely arresting people. And then, yes, in the midst of this trial in the Gun Trace Task Force, which was unearthing many terrible things about Baltimore police. There was one officer who was slated to testify, and the day before he was slated to testify, he was killed in a shootout in very suspicious circumstances. I'll note in the Freedom Side, I can't remember exactly when this was, when we had Tawanda West of West Wednesdays from Baltimore on, she actually spoke at length about this for those who want to go back and hear more about it. She spoke at length about what happened and a lot of the questions around it and how it fits in more broadly to police violence in the city of Baltimore, which I think is super important.